Hi, everyone. I'm Cortney Harding, and I'm really excited to moderate this panel today. We have a pretty short time frame and a bunch of pretty brilliant people up on the stage. So I'm just going to have everyone, first of all, do a super quick intro, and then we're going to dive right in and figure out how we build community in the metaverse. So let's solve this problem in 24 minutes. Okay, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Hossein Rahnama. I'm a visiting professor at MIT Media Lab. I'm founder and CEO of a company called Flybits and an associate professor at Toronto Metropolitan University.
I'm Scott Lyon. I'm the founder and CEO of Solace. We're building the world's first and only spiritual metaverse. I think that the traditional business model of organized religion is broken, but that there is a burning need and a massive opportunity for digital tools and virtual community to help people that are spiritual but not religious, so that's what we're planning to build.
Hi everyone, my name is Lindiwe Matlati. I am from South Africa. I'm the founder and CEO of Africa Teen Geeks, which is an NGO that I always say feeds my soul, and I run a company called Dietz, which pays my bills.
Everyone, I'm Evan Henshaw Plath. I go by Rabble. I was a member of the team that created Twitter many years back in the day, and at the moment I run a startup called Planetary.social that is a sort of commons-based, decentralized, self-certifying social media app and protocol.
Hey, my name is Joel Dietz. I guess I was part of the team that created Ethereum and MetaMask, a few other things. And more recently, I started working on a programming language for procedurally generating metaverses, which is fun. So basically, we have a platform as a service offering for metaverses. But on the topic that was already raised, one of the first projects to use it is something called the Crystalverse, to connect crystal lovers across the world with each other through 3D representations of physical crystals that they own. And I think it's exciting world that we're stepping into.
Oh my gosh, this is so fascinating. So I want to start off by asking everyone a question about what metaverse community, or what community do you think is the strongest right now? And I'd love to hear an example from everyone about a metaverse community, an NFT community, or even an IRL community that you think is amazing right now and why it's so amazing. And I'll go first to sort of give some context. So one of my favorite metaverse communities is Black Rock City VR, which was the Burning Man VR community that was built after Burning Man was canceled in 2020 due to COVID. And I think what they did so brilliantly was they created a place where you could do sort of the best of IRL. So you could spend time going from camp to camp, you could look at the art, you could hang out with your friends, right, which is what you can do in regular Burning Man. But then they also added kind of magical elements that you can only get in the metaverse. So you can fly around, you can jump, you can teleport. And what they did was they built out a place that people wanted to come back to again and again and keep spending time, which is something that I don't see a lot of other metaverse communities getting right. So with that sort of example in mind, I'd love to hear from the panel, again, what communities are doing really well, and if they're not metaverse communities right now, how could that be translated into a metaverse space? And whoever wants to jump in can raise their hand, yeah.
Sure. So one of the things that we are working on, so the company that I spun off over the past 5 years, it has worked with some very large, serious, complex enterprises, banks, telecom carriers. So over the past year, what we decided to do was to create an enterprise-driven metaverse in which data sharing, data governance, data sensitivity was a key issue for these entities. And up until about a year ago, we were rendering these semantic-driven enterprise information on a two-dimensional display. And then I work with some of my colleagues, some of them are in the room, is to ask them to go and build a very secure, well-authenticated metaverse channel for these very complex enterprises that many of them actually wanted to share data with each other, building these cross-industry experiences. So think about a telecom carrier, a bank, a utility company using a consent engine, and they want to render all of these information in a very new immersive experience called the metaverse. we looked at a number of opportunities, and then we decided to actually build our own rendering engine and building our own community among these entities that were collaborating. So we built something called the Open Dome, which is leveraging open banking protocols. So we said, hey, the Metaverse is a fantastic fabric for really bringing these experiences together and transform these siloed data assets into one unified experience. So we now, within Open Dome now, a user can authenticate to a number of financial institutions, from insurance organizations, retail banks, credit card companies, and render all of that in their personalized metaverse the way they want. The question to us from our customers was that, well, what's the difference between our previous digital channel, which was mostly the mobile phone, compared to the metaverse? And a lot of our research is around the ergonomics of usage when it comes to these enterprise-driven metaverses. Like, parents are sitting together at night and really looking for a decision space to make better financial decisions. Can they personalize it? Can they receive reporting data but also receive predictive data? So a lot of our work is to really understand how this channel can really bring serious, complex enterprises together to create more unified experiences for their customers.
Oh, that's super fascinating. All right, who wants to jump in?
I would, I'll cheat and I'll say there's an IRL community that I have a massive crush on, which is called, some of you may be familiar with Female Quotient. So Female Quotient is just buttoned down in every way, first class, but what's really impressive about them, they basically do, for those of you who don't know, like sort of female empowerment and networking, and you'll see them at Davos, and they'll have like little pods and things like that, but you know, they'll get like Sheryl Sandberg to show up at a pod at Davos in her pajamas. Like, that's crazy. Like, you're literally going among prime ministers in your pajamas, right? And so the reason that they resonate with me is because you think about spirituality, it's very personal, it's very delicate, right? There aren't any rules, right? And everyone is sort of uncertain whether they're getting it right. I've done hundreds of research, for example, just on the subject of prayer, and I've talked to people about how they pray, when they pray, you know, under what conditions they pray or whatever, and it's a complete S show out there, right? Like, no one knows if they're doing it right. In men, for example, I've interviewed at least 100 men of different ages. I've yet to find a single man that is comfortable going up to another person and saying, will you pray for me? Will you help me? They'll say, will you pray, will you help someone else? But they won't say, will you pray and help for me? So this idea of that in the metaverse, that you could be more psychologically daring, more kind of Brene Brown, kind of lean into your vulnerability and your uncertainty. I think I'd love to try to channel a little bit of Female Quotient into the metaverse I'm building.
That was a beautiful answer, and I'm really upset that I didn't get to wear my pajamas today, that I had to put on pants, because after 2 years of work from home, you know, pants are still kind of a novelty. All right, go ahead, who's next?
I think for me, like as I mentioned earlier, I've seen that there's a lot of announcements right now when people are saying this is what we're gonna do. So it seems like for me everything is still more of the vision, and because a lot of my work is, you know, as I mentioned, I have my NGO which is focused on inclusivity, which is really, I would say, take probably 60% of my time, is the lack of inclusivity even within this space. And so for me, some of my favorite NFT, I would say, project has been one that was founded by some guys in Nigeria who've been able to, you know, take the African art, and they've really been successful in showcasing the talent that we have in our continent, and that being something that I'm also very passionate about, and it's part of the project that I'm working on in terms of like within the metaverse, and you know, showcasing African talent, and now there's a lot of interest. You can see like from, you know, like the dance music. If you look at the recent album by Beyonce, a lot of the artists that you know, the producers are from Africa. Drake's album has producers from South Africa. So there's a lot of interest in terms of the talent that we have, but you still have to dig deep to try and find it, or have to go there to learn about it. And so the work that I'm doing is really you know, looking looking at how we can take what we have been doing and making sure that it's also accessible but easy for people to find their talent, and also to change the narrative about Africa. Like, we are always looking for help. There's no, we're not smart enough. There's a lot of us who are really brilliant. I mean, I can say so myself. I started in America, so I can be a bit, to talk about that. There's a lot of talented people, and that's really what we're trying to do also on our side, and hopefully, not waiting for people to try and do things for us.
That's an incredible answer, and I want to put a pin in a lot of what you said about Africa in particular, and we'll come back to it after the last two folks on the panel answer, because I really want to explore how we build a metaverse that is not only inclusive, but globally inclusive, and how we scale that. So I'm going to let the last two folks on the panel answer, and then we can dive into that.
So it's fascinating. When we think about digital community spaces online, we have this metaphor of it being like a physical space. That, the way in which it's governed is physical spaces. And so when we talk about the metaverse, we're actually doing a visual representation of a 3D space. But the idea that our communities online exist in a space with norms and rules is something that's been around for a long time. So, when I look at these spaces and communities, the way you find who's doing interesting stuff are the people who are marginalized and pushed off. So who explores new platforms? It's queer teenagers, it's sex workers, it's musicians and artists, it's all these people who, it's activists. And so these are all folks who are like, well, we can't exist on these other platforms, we have to keep searching for new ones. And so, things like furries. They're really weird, but they're constantly looking for creating community norms and structures and things like that and figuring out what it is. And those folks adopt these 3D worlds. But it's important that you build things that let people have ownership of their own spaces and set their own rules. And so that's why these protocol-based things are so interesting.
Yeah, just to double click on that a little bit. One thing that was fascinating to me about early Twitter, because I just read a book about this, is that Black Twitter was actually one of the strongest and biggest communities in early Twitter. And that was not something that the team at Twitter had gone after necessarily or tried to build out, but that it became a space where people who felt otherwise sort of excluded were able to really connect and grow and have that space. So it's always interesting to see how people take these spaces that are kind of neutral and really personalize them.
Yeah, and I think that was for two reasons. One, Twitter in the early days worked without a smartphone. So there were lots of Black youth who did not have access to smartphones and iPhones, but some of the people were on smartphones and some weren't, and that because you could follow and participate with low-cost hardware, it made a space. And the other was that that following relationship let you build sort of constrained communities, which was super powerful.
I highly resonate. I was actually just about to say furries myself. As far as IRL things, I think the global Burning Man culture has been very impressive to just show up in a new city and meet people. In the metaverse specifically, I think it's amazing how many people are still in Second Life. And similarly, it's the long tail type of experiences you can't get in real life. It allows you to network. Within our own experience, we have another metaverse being built right now called the Dreamverse. And one of the people who's leading it right now runs a dream interpretation group on Facebook with 600,000 people who are interested in having their dreams interpreted. So there's interesting kind of audiences out there for specific interests that don't necessarily find it's met. And then particularly within a metaverse context, you can not just have your dreams interpreted, you can have them visualized. So that, and then see other people's dreams. So it's kind of interesting.
Wow, that's a really interesting one. I got to check that out. So I think a common thread that we've seen throughout a lot of the answers up on this panel today are that people joining these communities are a lot of the times people who are from marginalized communities or people from communities that aren't sort of centered in the current internet that we have. So how do we, moving forward, as we scale this, right? Because this is going to scale. This has to scale. Otherwise, it's just like a weird niche thing that certain groups of people do, but it never gets to capacity. So as we scale this, how do we prevent what's happened with Web 2? And then how do we make sure we're not only including different voices, but those people are really active participants and often centered in discussions about how we build this, and they're centered as builders? So who wants to dive in?
So, I spent some time at the Center for Civic Media, which isn't anymore a group here at the Media Lab, and we ran a co-design studio where we actually worked with the grad students and did a process of mixing participatory design and engagement and design thinking with lean startup techniques so that the users of these apps, the communities that are going to adopt them, are participating in that design process as full participants, as opposed to the designers and creators going in and extracting that value. You know, you need to make it so that they're at the table, and you need to teach the users enough skills about the technology and the design work so that they can participate fully.
Yeah, and it's interesting to come back to Twitter again, right? Like, you look at the communities that were really foundational in building Twitter up, and then you look at who's gotten very wealthy off of Twitter. There's not a ton of overlap, right? So, like, how do we make sure it's not only people participating from day one, but people actually building and, let's be fair, monetizing from day one?
Yeah, I think I probably will be a bit more negative, than you, because, with the work that I'm doing and also with the way the metaverse is actually structured, it's already built in a way, the industry is built in a way that excludes, people who don't come from affluent environment. To build for the metaverse, you need to have, access to Unreal or Unity, and those, like, Unity is very expensive. If you use Unreal, you need to have a good computer. And if you talk to, if you think about people that come from disadvantaged communities, they would not have access to a good computer. They probably would have access to a phone, a smartphone, and not a good one at that. So, and a smartphone, you can't even use, Unity on it. So I think right now, the way the industry is set up, it basically excludes those who don't have access, and maybe don't know people like you and me who can even talk to them about that. Because just going to disadvantaged communities and talk about virtual reality, you have to explain what that is. And the VR goggles now are very expensive. With Google being out and Samsung Gear, even Samsung Gear was quite expensive for a lot of people. So I don't think right now it will be, but I hope that, those of us who are having that privilege to be able to build, we can think about that and see how we can include people in the way we're building, and hoping that we will, do more work to make sure that more people have opportunity for upward mobility. As it is, I think it will continue to stay being something for us.
Yeah, this is a challenge to anyone who is affiliated with Unity or Unreal or any other game engines in the audience today, or if you know someone, really push them on this, because that is a huge barrier to entry, right? There are not a lot of low-code or no-code solutions right now for building in the metaverse, as far as I'm aware. So, that's something that needs to happen. That's something that really helped democratize, I think, the first web was, you had LiveJournal, you had Blogger, you had all these platforms that you didn't have to be technical to use. And I think still right now, if you really want to build a metaverse world, you need to know at least some code, and you need, like you said, a powerful computer, you need a headset, you need all these things. And so how can we really focus on, like, democratizing that, getting that in front of people? Because if we don't do that, then we're going to get stuck in the same place we're stuck now, which is the people who are building are, as I like to say, demographically very similar. All right, who wants to go next? Go ahead.
I think you said it very well. One very interesting thing about Metaverse is that in addition of having the channel and the immersive experience and all that, is the fundamental shift on how we will be using data in the Metaverse. We are way more aware of our privacy and on ownership of data compared to where we were in Web 2.0 emergence. And if we really build protocols that really allows us to share data in a privacy preserving fashion with these metaverse channels, and as you said, have authoring tools that allow us to use templates, to use semantics, to be able to render these metaverses accordingly, that's going to become a very, very powerful channel. So combining, how we look at data, having no-code environments that almost a lot of us can create user-generated content, and also approaches that our panelists mentioned, like really co-create and co-design between developers, users, and consumers, I think it's going to be a fascinating channel that can actually deliver a lot of value.
Absolutely.
And, one of the reasons that Web3 has taken off is because that it's open source. Like, the protocols are open, the technology is open. You don't need to ask permission to start building on Ethereum. You don't need to ask permission to have your own wallet. You don't need to ask permission for any of these things. And the asking for permission is a barrier that locks people out. You still need the equipment, the hardware, and everything else, but at least now you can access the tools, and that's why we need to prioritize the tools that are open.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, while there still remain a lot of barriers to entry, I think you're totally right. It is more open than it has been in previous years. There's a couple of folks we haven't heard from. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I will say that for the Crystalverse, people are just 3D scanning objects. There's a number of apps for that now. They're uploading their crystals. It's basically as easy to use as these apps are. And I think that, there's still an amount of kind of what is the user experience going to be that like allows people to engage. But I think that this general like personalization of spaces and then kind of networking and then even the kind of retail around kind of unusual objects that would be hard to find, like unique objects, is going to be an interesting thing to see how it plays out.
I think, for example, too, that you talked about scalability, like we all need to do a more robust and imaginative job around product development, right? So let's take, for example, like a crypto wallet, right? Like today it's a tab in your browser, you put in your ETH, it's kind of a transaction mechanism. I don't want to say it's a commodity, but it's commodity-like, and more and more people entering the space. And we were talking last night that a wallet could and should be so much more, right? It could be about your identity. It could be about your communities of interest. It could be a signaling tool to say, I'm a dream interpreter, I'm a helicopter pilot, whatever your rabbit hole is, right? So I think if you give people the tool to better brand their identity or identities, plural, right? And we're going to be talking about pseudonymity and anonymity, right? There's going to be all sorts of identity bending tools. I think we can do a better job of giving people tools to send out bat signals in the metaverse. This is what I'm interested in. Are you interested in? I think that's going to allow some of these communities to kind of organically formulate.
Absolutely. All right, we've got time for like one more thing, so people can kind of go quick. What is the biggest mistake people are making right now when they're building metaverse communities? And I'll kick it off. So I see people not resourcing their communities correctly. So I've seen tons of brands say, we're building a metaverse world, we're building Wendy's in the metaverse, or JP Morgan in the metaverse, right? And they build a world, and they put out a press release, and they get an article in Adweek, and then that's kind of it, and a week later it's a ghost town. They're not resourcing it correctly so that they can grow the community and sustain the community. So we've got just over 2 minutes, so go quick. What's the mistake people are making?
I'll quickly go back. I think for me is that I agree with what you're saying, but I think most of the reason for it is that kind of Me Too kind of announcement, that you just want to say, I'm also in it, but there's no plan. You don't even know there's no strategy to what is it that we're going to do, why are we building what we are building, except just to say, this new fad or whatever. For a lack of a better word, I want to say I'm also in it. So I'm just going to make an announcement. Probably most of these things, I don't think they'll even get built.
Absolutely.
I would say that, especially in the metaverses that come out of Web3, is the assumption that things should be driven by extrinsic motivation. That most people create social spaces for intrinsic reasons, for social reasons, and just because you can do transactions and you can do financial parts of it doesn't mean that you should all the time. You need to use the extrinsic part of the motivation sparingly.
I was involved, in creating the first Ethereum co-working space and many other things like that. And I think one of the clear things that was, missed is a combination of sort of user experience, which, and spearheading, MetaMask and the browser adoption or something there, and the marriage with kind of standard ethics, business ethics, transparency, and those kind of things. And unfortunately, many of the metaverse projects have sort of dropped the second category, and people know that there's so much wash trading in this industry, and so much of the volume is fake. But there's no accountability, and the big platforms are generally quite guilty of just basically bypassing that whole issue. And so there's not trust, and without trust, you don't get community.
Absolutely.
I think, yeah, kind of building on a couple of these comments, it's sort of, you try to hack the cold start problem, right, by saying, okay, there's kind of a financial big bang, there's a minting, there's an event, you're cool for 30 seconds, but like then what? Like 3 months from now on Friends with Benefits, what are the benefits, right? Like what's going to keep me coming back here, right? And so people are so obsessed with getting over that first launch and being cool and showing up, at NYT, New York NFT or something like that. But like it's a long grind, like community building is an organic slog, and so you have to take the long view.
And I think the key thing is data ownership and data governance is really missing in how these metaverses are being created. And a lot of them, as you mentioned, brands are thinking about personalizing the metaverse versus they should think more about making it more participatory. So as people share their data, there should be win-win value for everyone.
Absolutely. All right, well, that was an amazing panel. Thank you, everyone, so much for sharing your ideas. We could go literally all day and into the next, because this is a huge thing we need to keep discussing and solving for. I think most people will be around the rest of the day, so please feel free to hit us up. And again, thank you all so much for coming, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks, everyone.